Okay, so now it's time to configure our static files with our Django project. So static files are basically any kind of CSS, JavaScript, or image file, or basically any kind of external file here. So before we start styling our page, we don't want to have to write that CSS inline in our HTML file. We want to create some kind of external folder that's going to handle all of these static files. So Django has a way of configuring that for us. So we're just going to have to run through that. And what we're going to do in this video is first connect our style sheet. We'll add in a logo here so we'll be able to see some images, and then we'll have to finish this up by adding another field into our project model so we can actually see a picture that goes with the project. So later on we'll have things like profile pictures, and there's a custom way of actually connecting this field to a model, and then we're also going to have to do a few things to render that out. It's a little bit different from our typical static files. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go into our project here, and in the root directory, so in the same folder or file path as manage.py in templates here, go ahead and create a new folder, and we're just going to call this static. So this is where all of our static files are going to sit. So inside of static, let's go ahead and create a file for our styling, so any kind of CSS file or folder here. Then we want to create another folder. This is going to store all of our project images, so user uploaded images, logos, and so on like that. And we're also going to create one for JavaScript, so we'll just do JS. And don't worry, we're not going to be using much JavaScript here, but I just wanted to add that so you can see what the file structure is typically going to look like. Now, inside of the static folder, we're going to go into styles here, and we want to create our first style sheet. So we're just going to call this main.css. So we're just going to create a CSS sheet here, and let's go ahead and just style something. So we'll just style the h1 tag. At this point, I believe my logo is in an h1 tag, so something that we're going to see right away. If you use a different tag, go ahead and do something like that. You can even do like a p tag here. So let's create some colors here for the paragraphs. So let's just do blue for all the paragraphs and then red for the h1 tag. So we just want to see something be output. So in this case, let's just do red here, and that should do. So we have our style sheet, but the style sheet is not going to be applied to our website. So if we try to refresh this, Django does not know where this file is, and it doesn't know what to do with it. So if we go back in here, the first step here is to go into our settings.py, and we need to configure our static files. So down here in settings.py towards the bottom of the file here, let's go ahead and go to the bottom where we see the static URL, and underneath here, let's go ahead and create a new variable, and we're going to call it static files _ dirs. So this isn't a custom variable. We actually need to call it this exactly. So that's just a list right here. This is how the Django documentation tells us to do this. And static files dir right here, or directories, is kind of like our templates right here. So this is where we went into our root directory right here, and we connected it to our templates folder. So remember when we did that, we need to let Django know that we have some static files. So we want to point this to static. So we're basically telling Django, go ahead and go into this route here and find that file. So we're just going to do os.path.join, and we're going to do base dir like that. And then we can just say, go ahead and find the static folder. So in the newer versions of Django, you can actually do this right now. So in the latest version that we just installed, this should work. But if you're having an issue, go ahead and use that version where we do os.path.join, and that will work. So this one, or we can revert back to what we just had. So let's go ahead and actually add in some of these files into our template. So Django now knows about this static folder. So it looks in here and it knows that we have this. So to actually apply a static file into our template, we're going to go into main.html, and let's go ahead and uncomment this, and we'll get rid of this JavaScript link right here. We don't need that. And let's go into this link right here. So in here, and I'll just go ahead and create some, or we'll go ahead and just indent that so we can see that better. So in this link right here for the href, let's go ahead and remove what we have there right now. And we have single quotes on the outside. So let's go ahead and use a tag here. And we're going to create a static tag. So in order to actually point this to that file, we're going to do static. And then in double quotes, so because we have single quotes out here, we're going to use double quotes in here. We're just going to point to styles / main.css. So this right here just dynamically finds this static folder, and then we went into styles and then main.css. So we just created the file path for that. Now, in order for this to work, we have to load in static into our template. So at the top here, just underneath doc type, let's just go ahead and do load static. So we're going to let the template know that we can actually use static files in here. So we're just going to do load static. So make sure you do this, then connect your static files to whatever you have your file and your folder named. And now this template should be able to use those static files. So if I go ahead and save this, we'll save settings.py, make sure everything is up to date. We'll go into our template. And if I do Control-Shift-R, let's just do a hard refresh. Now we can see this being updated. So we can see that style that we applied in main.css, and we see that h1 tag. So if you didn't call it h1, just find something in your template that you actually styled that way. If anything, you can just do body, and that should get everything. So if you do body and then set the background color to beige or something like that, let's just do yellow for now. And it's gonna look horrible, but I just wanna make sure that you can actually see it. So something that can show that the style sheet was applied. If it's not working right away, do a Control-Shift-R and that should update it. So everything's working here. I'm gonna get rid of that body styling, and I'm also gonna get rid of this paragraph tag so we know this file is connected. And the next thing I wanna do is actually add in some images, and I wanna render out a logo in my header here. So right here, I actually have a logo prep. So this is gonna be in your resources folder from that GitHub repo. I just dragged it into my screen here. So I'm gonna minimize this, and we'll minimize that right there. From resources, go ahead and go into images and find your logo here. So that's gonna be logo.svg. Again, that's in the GitHub repo, so download it and take these files. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna open up our project, and we're gonna go into static and then images. And let's take our logo and let's also take this default picture because we are gonna use this later. So paste those into your images folder. So now if I close these out, if I go in here, I can go into static and then images, and I can see logo right here and then default.jpg. So don't worry about this. This is just an SVG file. And now we can add this into our template. So to add it to our template, our static files are connected here. So we'll go into our navbar and we're gonna add it in here. So let's go ahead and create some space here. And the first thing we wanna do is load that static tag. So we're just gonna do load static. So it's kind of weird. I thought that originally if we add this into our main template and if something's inheriting from it, it would work like that. But we have to add this into every page that we want to use it. So go ahead and load that in. And then in here, just above our link, let's go ahead and create an image tag here. Close it up here, and then we'll just do source. And then to connect that, it's going to look a lot like our style sheet. So we're just going to add in double quotes here in this case, and then use that static tag. So let's create some space. Let's go to the static folder. So now we're letting Django know look into static. And in this case, now in single quotes, because we're using double quotes out here, we're going to go into images. And then we're going to go into /logo.svg. If you're using a different logo, just make sure you have the name and then the type that it is. So if I save this, we should be able to see this logo in our navbar now. So if let's see what happened here. Okay, invalid tag. And I forgot to add in static here. So let's go ahead and update that. I must have erased it by accident. So let's add static. And then now if I refresh it, let's go ahead and do that. Here we go. Here is our logo. It's a little bit hard to see, but that is our picture. We can see the spacing is some like light purple there and then darker purple. But now we just added an image in here. So if I go ahead and open this up here, we can see the file path. So we're going into our URL, we're going into static images, and then we're grabbing that logo. So we just added some styling, and we also added in our images here too. So we can now connect both. Now to actually render images for these projects here, there's gonna be a little bit or a few more things that we have to configure here. So user uploaded content has to take care of a few things before we can actually put it out in our page. So let's go ahead and go back to the model. So these aren't technically static files the way that these are prepped here. So what we're gonna have to do is go into your app where you're gonna connect it to a model, the actual image here, and we're gonna go into our project model here. So this is why I left this out, because we need to do some things here that are gonna be a little bit different. The first thing is, let's just go ahead and do featured_image. So let's add in a new attribute. And this attribute here, I'm actually gonna open up my terminal here. So I wanna show you something that's gonna happen. So we're gonna create this attribute and we're gonna do models.image field. So by default, I want to allow it to be null and blank. So let's go ahead and add that in. And then we also need to specify an image by default that will be added if we don't add our own. So for example, if we create a new project, if we don't add an image, we want some kind of default. Like Facebook will do this for you where they'll have some kind of fake image for you until you upload your profile picture. So in here, we're gonna go in here and we're just gonna say default. And that's gonna be pointing to default.jpg. So we're going in here into static and we're going into default.jpg. So if you had this in a different folder, if you had a folder called like profile pictures, you would have to go to profile pictures, then default.jpg. But we're just going to point to it. So now every model that we don't add an image for is going to have that default picture until we modify it. So we just did image field, null and blank set to true. Default is default.jpg because we have it in here. So make sure you have it. And now we're ready to migrate. So this is the reason why I didn't add it right away. If we do this, we're going to see this error right here. And basically we're saying that we need pillow because the image field here needs something called an image processing library. So pillow is simply an image processing library that we need to install. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn this off here. And VS Code is being kind of funny right now, so I have to do python-m, and you might not need to do this, but just go ahead and try pip install and then do pillow like that. If that doesn't work for you, just do python-m and that should take care of it for you. So we just installed pillow. Now if I run my server, now everything's working. So we installed it. Now we can actually use the image field. So that's why I didn't add it originally, was because we had to install pillow and I didn't want to have to show you that earlier. So we'll just do Django pillow like this. And here's a documentation. So if you need to look it up here, pillow.readthedocs.io, and it's going to tell you how to install it and what it is here. And I think that was actually the wrong one here. Here we go. This is the one right here. So pillow, let's go to the newest version, and we're going to have the installation, I guess, guide here and how to do that. But if you want to take a look at it, go ahead and look at that. So now that we have this image field, we're still not done. We need to know where to upload user generated content. At this point, if we try to upload this image field, Django is not going to know what to do with it. So let's go ahead and try this. So if I go into my admin panel, let's go ahead and, oh, no column exists. Okay, sorry about that. Let's go ahead and first run a migration. So we need to migrate it, let Django know that we are going to be using this field. So Python manage.py make migrations. So we're going to prep the migrations and then we're going to migrate it. Python manage.py migrate. And I spelt that wrong here. So there we go. So it applied those migrations and our server is still on. So I'll just minimize that. Let's go into our admin panel. And we're just going to do /admin. Okay, so now we are good. So if we go to a project here, if I go in here and click on, let's say, e-commerce website, we're now going to see that default because we added that default attribute inside of our models.py. So it automatically just connected this image to that. So if we open up our project right here, what we want to do is when we update our own picture, we want our pictures to go into static and images. And that is not going to happen right now. So let's actually show you what's going on here. So I'm going to move this like that here. And let's take a look at, oops, what did I click there? I just wanted to extend this. And then we'll move this to the right here. Okay, so sorry about that. It's being a little bit funny. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's close that. And here we go. Okay, so when I try to upload an image, I want it to go in here. But that's not going to happen. So we're going to show you what happens here first, and then we'll update it. So let's say I want to go ahead and update this picture. So let's go into my desktop. I'll go into resources, wherever that is. And let's go into images, and let's just grab this picture right here. So when I go ahead and hit open, I'm going to save that. That image by default was not added into static and images. It was added in here in that root directory. So by default, until we actually configure this, Django does not know where to send that picture. So what it's going to do is it's just going to send it into our project in the root directory. And then this is going to get messy if we don't have it actually configured. We're just going to have a ton of images. If we have thousands of users, this will get really ugly and we don't want to do that. So to actually tell Django where to upload this, we're going to go into settings.py and let's go ahead and go down here. So in settings.py, we need to configure something called media_root. So media root simply tells Django where to upload user generated content. So this is what that's for. Check that out in the documentation if you want to know details. But in here, we're just going to point this to os.path join, and we're going to tell Django when a user uploads some content, go into the base directory, and then go into static, and then go into the images folder and place that image in here. So if I save this, let's go ahead and delete this. So I'm just going to delete it. Now we don't have that image in here. If we go into static, we can see two pictures, default and logo.svg. So let's go back into our admin panel. Let's go back into e-commerce and let's just re-upload that picture. So if I go ahead and take that same picture, open that and then hit save, look where that went. So that went into my images folder inside of static, and that is in the right place now. So it's not in this root directory, and that's because of this right here. So media root is simply telling Django where to upload content that's submitted by users. So anytime we submit that image field, everything's gonna go into static and then images. So now to actually render this, now this part gets a little bit tricky too. So let's go ahead and take care of this. If we go into our templates here, so let's go into our app, into project or single project.html. So in here, we want to render some kind of picture and we actually want to see that user's picture. So if we go into e-commerce, we're not seeing anything. So we want to actually see this being output. So in here, let's go ahead and above our title, let's create some kind of image field. So we'll just do img here and we'll just say source, set this in double quotes here, and then let's grab that picture. So that's actually going to be a variable. So we're not going to load it in with that static image tag because this is part of a model. We're going to do double curly braces, so it's a variable. And then what we're going to do is we're going to access the project object, and we're going to do project.image underscore or featured image. So whatever you call that attribute in your model, so featured underscore image like that. And this isn't going to be enough. So this is going to point to the image file, but we want to actually point to the image URL. So we do the object, the attribute, and we have to add in one more thing here, and that's going to be image.url like that. Okay, so now if I save this, it's still not going to work, but we're one step closer. So if I refresh that, we can see this image, but for some reason it's still not showing. And why is this not showing? Well, because user uploaded content is really its own thing, we still need to tell Django exactly how to connect that URL here. So if I go back into settings.py here, we can see a media root, and there's also a variable here, just like static URL. It's called media underscore URL here. And by default, it's set to an empty string. So that's here, we can't see it unless we customize it and do something like go to images and do something like that. It's gonna be an empty string. So we're gonna leave it like that. Hey everyone, sorry for the quick interruption here, but let's make sure we leave the media URL as a string saying images here. So a / and then a closing /. We ran into some issues later on, so this actually fixes that issue. So make sure it says images in there. So what I'm gonna do is actually just leave it there. And what we need to do is go into our urls.py file within our root directory. So this one right here that has the admin panel and the include method. And we need to add in a few things into this file here. So basically we just need to add a path to actually find those images. So let's make a few imports here. So we're just going to do from Django.conf, and we're going to go into here and we're just going to do import settings. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have access to the settings.py file because we're going to have to connect to our media root and our media URL. So we're going to go into settings, and then we're also going to do from Django.conf, and from here we're going to go into URLs, so .urls here, and then .static, and we're going to import the static function or method here. So we're just going to import static, and static is basically going to help us create a URL for our static files. So now that we have these two imports, and I'll just create some space here. So we imported these two things, and we need to add a path to URL patterns here. And instead of writing that in directly, we're just going to do URL patterns here, and we'll just append to that. So plus equals, and we're going to use this static method here, and we're going to say go ahead and set a URL path. So the actual path here, we're going to go into settings. So within statics, we can start writing in settings here dot media underscore URL. So we're going to set the URL here, which we're getting from settings here. We're just taking that, and at this point, it's just the root domain. And then we're going to point this to document underscore root. And this is going into settings again. So that settings.py file, and we are going to connect this to media underscore root. So media root is where we send user uploaded content, and we just created a file path. So Django before did not know how to actually set that. We didn't have a URL route for that. So we just created it. We used the static method. We went into settings, grabbed the URL, and connected it to media root. And that's just appended to these URL patterns here. So if I save this, let's go ahead and save everything and check out our template. So in the template, if I go ahead and refresh that, I'm going to do that with a Control-Shift-R. So now we can actually see this image in the template. So this is a user uploaded image, and we can actually see that. So let's quickly just style this really quick. We'll go in here, and I just want to set some kind of width here so it looks a little bit better. And I'm going to set max width to 500 pixels. So we'll just do PX like that, and that's supposed to be 500. For some reason, didn't type that out. And let's take a look here. So I'm going to refresh it, and there we go. So if I go to that root URL here, if I go to any one of these, we're just going to see that default here. So for these ones, we didn't upload anything, so they're just pointed to that default picture. But if I go to e-commerce, there we go. So what I want to do next is actually allow our users to submit the image themselves here. So users will not have access to this admin panel. So at this point, we just go into the admin panel and we upload the picture here. So I want this field right here to be in the users form. And that way we can process what a user submits rather than what a Django admin can do here. So for this, we need to go into our model form. So we'll go ahead and go into our project app here, and we'll go into forms.py, and we added a new attribute to that model. So let's add a comma here, and that was called featured underscore image. So the second we add this is going to be inside of our page here, or in our form. So we still have to do a few things. So the field is here, but this form will not process this image yet. So if we go back into our project form here, so single or project form, the first thing we want to do is tell this form to actually submit some form data here, or submit some files. So we're going to set the ink type to multi-part /form-data. So now this form can actually submit that data, because if we don't have this and we send it, it's just going to send the original basically fields in that form, but it's not actually going to send the files. Once we do this, so set the ink type to multi-part form data, let's go into our views now. And within our views, we need to process that form data. So we're going into our create project view along with our original post method. Let's add in a comma, and we'll just do request.files. So now that we send the files here, so now that we can send these files in the backend, we can actually get those files. So we're going to do that for create project. And then we also want to do that for our update project. In this case, we're passing in the instance here. So just after request post, let's do request.files, add in that comma, and that should be it. So we added that to the form, and then we processed that in the backend. So if I go ahead and add a new project, we'll just say new project here. If I submit this, actually I probably should refresh it. I'll just do Control-Shift-R because that didn't process that originally. So let's just go back to the home page and then do add project, because we just updated the template. So let's do new project. And if we don't select something here, it's going to go to that default image. So let's actually select some kind of picture here. We'll just take this one right here. We'll hit submit. And then if I go to view new project, there we go. We see that picture, and that's going to appear in my static files now. So this is something that we just did manually instead of using the Django admin panel. So if I go to images, there we go. We see this picture. So we did that for the create form. So what I'm going to do is actually delete this. And let's just quickly update these ones right here. So Yoga Vibe just uses that default picture. So if we want to modify that, it tells me what it's using right here if there is an image. So we'll just go here, take Yoga Vibe, submit that. Then we'll go into Code Sniper, take that here. We'll find Code Sniper, and let's just make sure that's working. So we'll go ahead and view Code Sniper. And there we go. So we are able to submit forms here with files. So where is the portfolio there? Let's submit that, and then let's go to the social network. So let's just quickly update these. So that's it for now. We still have to do a few other things here. So we configured all of our static files. So we have images, we have our CSS files. We even added in user uploaded content here. So we're able to display this right here. And we're also able to submit these files in a form. Now, the last thing I want to get into is maybe getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I want to talk about static files in production. So Django typically is not built for serving static files in production. Right now we're in development, but once we put this up on a server, we need another way of hosting these. So there is a third-party library called Django White Noise, and this is what I'm going to use to host our basic static files. And then user uploaded content, I'm going to use something like AWS S3 buckets or Linode. I haven't decided exactly what we'll use, but we want to separate our static files from our Django project. So let me show you what's going to happen when we're actually putting this up on a live server. So we're going to close all of this out here, and we'll just leave settings.py here. So in production, once we actually want to put this up on a server, we're typically going to put or set debug to false here, and we're going to test this out in a second. This will be false, which means that our static files will no longer work. So we'll get into that in a second. But before that, once we put debug set to false, we are not going to be able to serve our static files from this folder here. So you can see we have static files for our project, and there are also static files for our Django admin panel. We have to get this styling from somewhere. So there's JavaScript involved here, there's CSS, and this is all styled somehow. So there's static files that we don't see here. So what we're going to need to do is we are going to need to set something called a static underscore root. Static root is kind of like media root, where media root defines where user uploaded content is going to go. Static root is basically going to define where our static files in production are going to be. So in this case, let's go ahead and just set this. We'll just do os.path.join, so .path.join, and I'm going to set this to the base directory, and we're going to go ahead and point this to a folder called static files, and this can be called whatever you want it to be. So at this point, we do not have this file here now, or this folder. We could manually create it, but we don't need to do it. There's going to be a command called collect static that will run this for us. And what collect static is going to do is it's going to take all of these files in here, all the folders in here, and any other static files that we have, and it's going to bundle them up into one file, and then Django can take care of that from there. So if we go ahead and save this, let's go ahead and open up our terminal here. So I'll open up a new one. We are going to run Python manage.py collect static. So this will only work once we configure this. So when we run this, it's going to bundle up those files, and it's going to create this folder for us and throw all of our static files in there. So let's just go ahead and run that. And it told us it took 137 static files and put them into a folder. When we ran that, this just got created. So we can see all the static for the admin panel. We can see all the static files from here. So you see images here. It basically just duplicated that and put all of these static files into here. So if we were to modify this, let's say we worked on our website a little bit and we added new static files, you would just run collect static again before you deploy it. So in this case, we would just say, yes, we want to rerun this. And right now we basically didn't change anything. So 137 unmodified files here. So it might be a little bit confusing at this point. So we basically just bundled up those static files. I'll try to explain it later on once we get to further into our project and get ready to deploy it. But what just happened here is our static files are bundled up, and we still need a third-party package to actually display these. So this step right here, you actually don't necessarily need to follow at this point. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and go to debug mode, and I'll just show you what this does if you don't know what this does at this point. Debug mode just helps us debug our application. So if we go ahead and go to a page that doesn't exist, we're going to see this message here, and it's going to tell us what the error is, and this can actually expose some sensitive information about our website. So it's a little bit outside of the scope of static files, but this does change something. So if somebody wants to do something malicious on our site, we don't want them to see this. So what we need to do is we need to set debug to false. And for now, we're going to keep this as true, but we're going to change it for a second here so we can see, because when you're deploying it, this is what you'll do. So we're going to save this, and it's going to cause a little error here. So it's telling us that we need to set some allowed host if debug is false. Allowed host basically just means these are the domains that are allowed to actually connect to our website. So some of you may be working on localhost, so we'll add that. I am running on port 8000, so what I'm going to do is take this URL, so 127.0.0.1, and I'm going to say go ahead and just allow this route here. So take out the / and then everything before it, and then once you deploy this on a live server, you'll say something like mywebsite.com here. And that obviously will be in a string. So that's what allowed hosts are. They're basically the hosts that are allowed to connect to our website. So if I save this and run the server again, we're going to be able to see our website. So now everything looks good. But the problem is our static files are not going to be served up anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to my main page. I'm going to do a Control-Shift-R, and look what happened. Static files are now no longer being served, and we cannot see the pictures. So in debug mode, Django is now looking into my static files instead of this static folder here. So to actually make this work, we need to go to our URLs here. So we'll go into our root directory, into the URLs file, and we're just going to take this right here, this URL pattern, and we need to set a URL path to the static files. So let's go down here. Just like we did with our media root, we need to set a URL path here. So we'll go into URLs here, we'll paste that in, and we're going to change this one to static URL. So now we're going into the static URL and we're setting that. And then we are going to go into media or static root. So we're taking, actually let's just type this out. So we'll do static root. Okay, so we just set a URL path from static URL into static root, just like we did media URL to media root. So now we have a file path, but that's not all we have to do. Django still doesn't know how to serve these up. So what we're going to do is we're going to install a third-party package called Django White Noise. And again, we're not going to have to do this until we're deploying it, but I do want to show you how to do this right now. So we pip install white noise, and then we simply need to add this to our middleware. So let's go ahead and run that install. And because VS Code has been giving me some issues, I'm going to run Python -m, and you don't need to do this if it's working for you. Just run pip install white noise. Okay, so it just installed white noise, and to actually configure it, it's telling us to go into our middleware. So we're going to copy that, and it's telling us to do this inside of settings.py. So we're going to go into settings.py, and let's see. So in settings.py, where is that middleware? Let me just move that down. Let's add that just underneath our security middleware. So I'm going to save that, and let's see what happens here. So if I go here, now that we added our middleware, I'm going to do a Control-Shift-R, and there we go. Now we see our colors back, and we see our static files. Now, there's still one little issue here. Our user uploaded content won't show, and that's fine for now. We'll take care of that later. Basically, we are going to use a third-party package like Linode or S3, depending on what we decide, and that will serve it. So white noise will not serve user uploaded content. So we don't have to worry about that, but as long as the styling is back on our website, we can now see it. So if I wanted to make an update, let's just do this. So we're still in debug mode, or we still have debug set to false. We can go in here. And what if we wanted to change this to blue? So let's just modify this. So I'm going to save this. And if I want to view this on my website, if I do Control-Shift-R, we're not going to see that change. Why is that happening? So I just modified this static folder, but we're not serving our static files from here. We're serving it from these static files. And in here, it's still set to red. So what I'm going to do is run python manage.py, collect static. And remember, we don't have to keep running this. This is only when we're pushing our website, and this will be done automatically for us. So we're just going to go ahead and run collect static, and we are going to overwrite what we have. And now that was just changed to blue. So now Django is going to take this static file, and it's going to serve it from here. And that file just got updated to blue. So it just bundled up our static files, and now I can see it. So that's it for that. While we keep developing this, what we're going to do is we are actually going to go back in settings.py, and we're going to set this back to true. So we are now going to be able to see all the changes we make. So now if I go into my static folder, if I go into styling and I change this to purple now, let's do purple, we are going to see it right away because debug is false, and we are serving it up from that static file. So we're not going to get into that till later. Just wanted to cover that and make sure that's all in one step. So we now have, if we go down here, our media root configured to media URL, static URL configured to static root, and the URLs were set right here. So we just modified that, connected everything, and we had to install white noise, which we ran a pip install for. It just helps us serve up our static files, and we added that into our middleware. So in the next video, we're going to start installing our theme and making this website actually look good.